All right, Dad, today is Wednesday, August 14th, and let's start this off by talking about Kursk. So I've been hearing a couple different things. I want to know what's going on. One thing I've heard is, I believe it was from Larry Johnson, is that that this invasion into Kursk was orchestrated and organized by NATO. Don't quote me if it was Larry Johnson, forget who exactly told me, but that this they were actually trained in Poland and there were exercises for this, that this was a NATO operation. I don't know if that's true. And then I've heard other reports as well saying
Right.
that this was something that Russia wanted to happen, that Russia was setting a trap for Ukraine. So can you tell me your assessment of what's going on? What's the situation right now with this Kursk invasion?
Right. Well, I've heard those stories too. I mean, yeah, first that it was a NATO operation, and I think that some people leapt to that conclusion because it was a very well coordinated offensive. It was small scale. It's an incursion. It was also they were attacking probably the weakest point on the line. There were no minefields. The Russians just had some border guards. They didn't really have any significant military presence right there. So, it is not surprising that the Ukrainians made significant progress during that first day. Um, but they, but you have to say to their credit, first of all, it was a surprise, right? I mean, well, there's that other theory we'll get into that the Russians were laying a trap. But if they weren't doing that, clearly they surprised the Russians. And so, that's difficult to achieve in this time of, uh, you know, a sky full of eyes, drones everywhere, satellites circling the globe, and um, geostationary satellites directly overhead, watching everything that's going on all the time. Um, so just because of the professionalism of this surprised a lot of people. And I think that on that basis, they leapt to the conclusion that, yeah, this was NATO directed, NATO orchestrated. Um, Now, against that, it seems like I think as I mentioned earlier, if this really was a NATO operation, you would think that typically they would have their kind of the information warfare part of it all set up ready, but they seem to be taken by surprise. I mean, that generally there was really not much coverage of it during the first couple of days, and the comments that you got from a lot of European leaders is like, "Yeah, we don't know what they're doing," right? So that makes me think, and that it really was a Ukrainian operation. Um, that's what I lean to. And now, as for that theory that the Russians actually were laying a trap, I find that difficult to believe because it was, in the end, it's strategically insignificant. In the long run, I'm thoroughly convinced it's going to hurt the Ukrainians. But in the short run, it was an embarrassment, you can say, for the Russians, for the Russian government, for Putin. And there were plenty of civilians that were killed. There was the ambulance driver and the paramedic, the pregnant woman, the old woman, and in her home, in the apartment, um, and you would have to say that the Russians, well, first of all, were going to allow this humiliation to occur, and then second, that they were going to sacrifice a number of civilian lives for this, and they lost. There was a significant number of prisoners were taken too. Something like 30. Also, if it was really a trap, you would think that they would have plenty of forces there, like in the woods nearby, ready to pounce on them as soon as they had some, but there just really wasn't. The Ukrainians were able to, the smaller detachments were able to go in, 10, 20 kilometers deep. And it did take some time for the Russians to move reserves into position. They're there now, they're pounding the Ukrainians now, they're pushing them back. But it took a couple of days. And so it just does not look to me like this was a trap that they set up. I think
Mm.
that they really were taken by surprise. And again, why were they taken by surprise? I think there could have been some incompetence on the part of the local commanders, and I wouldn't be surprised at all that played a role in this. But maybe you also have to give credit to the Ukrainians. They were able to disguise what they were doing as some kind of training exercise. And then on top of that, I the very kind of irrationality of this, which even the Western analysts are saying, it's like this really doesn't make sense, right? I'm sure that that's something that the Russians were looking and analyzing the situation the same way. They're looking at the front and say, well, they they may try to pull off some sort of counterattack somewhere, but it just doesn't make sense here. What would that achieve? And so that may be part of the reason that they were caught with their pants down, because it doesn't really make sense. In the end, it's not going to do them any good. Um, yeah, so you know, I I don't think any of us knows, right? We're all on the outside, but I still strongly lean towards um, the theory. I guess you would say Occam's razor, the simplest explanation. They simply were caught with their pants down, and it took them a little time to react. But now, they had the reserves. They're taking care of the situation now. But there was a kind of a mess for a couple of days there, and civilians died, and there was an embarrassment for the Russians. But in the end, it's just not going to be even considered a significant event in this war. It just doesn't. If anything, it'll be remembered like the beginning of the end for the Ukrainians. So at the time that they stupidly pulled men off the line where they were losing already.
So you think that this was an independent operation by Ukraine and it caught the Russians completely by surprise? You don't
Yeah.
believe that the United States or NATO had any knowledge of this event? I mean, I feel like the US and NATO are so involved and intertwined. I mean, we
Yeah.
had, what, a
Right.
dozen, 13 CIA bases in Ukraine. We're
Yeah.
boots on
Well,
the
that
ground.
right. Right.
Like how would we not know that this was happening? And
Um,
just to say, well, just to say as well, you said that, the one of the reasons that makes you think that NATO wasn't involved is that there was no information PR campaign. But wouldn't NATO also want to maybe distance itself from
that's a
saying that they are
possibility.
directly
Yeah.
involved in this? Because we're
Right.
using, German
Yeah.
tanks are rolling
Okay.
into Russia. American Bradleys are
Yeah.
moving in here. This is NATO equipment moving in. If NATO did it, then this is essentially a NATO invasion if they admitted it. So they can't say like, oh, we were involved in planning this and training
Right.
this
Right.
event,
Right.
right? That'd be stupid to say that we were, right? So
Right. Right. No. No.
I
No.
feel
Actually,
like
yeah, you make a very good point. And I'll concede it. Yeah. That is a possibility. Actually, I think you made a very good point that yeah, the sophistication again of the attack suggests that there was MI6 and NATO involvement. I mean, remember right at the start there was a rumor that MI6 was involved with it, which would mean that NATO was to some extent as well. Um, Now it may, yeah, maybe they were involved in it, but the other rumor again, who knows if we're just being leaked misinformation or not, is that this was actually something that Zelensky wanted to do for a long time, and nobody went for it. His own generals were against it, but he managed to succeed. Now, yeah, I guess if in fact this was something that was being talked about for a long time, it is hard to believe that NATO knew nothing about it, didn't get any wind of it. So they probably at least knew about it, and I concede it is possible that they actually did get involved in the planning of this attack, and then for the reasons that you stated, they decided, just to pull back and really not say anything in the first couple of days, and then pretend later that they were surprised because there is this need for plausible deniability. They need to maintain some distance because it is a clear escalation. It goes beyond the scope that they had carefully set for, attacks on pre-1991 Russian territory. Um,
right, and
you know, so yeah,
uh,
so you may be right. Okay, I'll concede that's I like your theory.
so you agree more. You're more on the putting more
Well,
weight on the
right,
theory that NATO was
right.
involved. I mean, and then the question is to what extent? Like,
Yeah,
I
that's the
heard
question.
reports that NATO was actually training for this exercises in NATO countries, and
Hmm.
I've also heard reports. I don't know if you can verify this as well that the Russians were intercepting airwaves of individuals in Kursk, and that there were American English accents being spoken within
Yeah,
Kursk, that there were
right,
American soldiers or American mercenaries personnel of some kind
right.
in Kursk that were involved in that. Is there anything that you
I've
can
heard,
say to
yeah.
verify that, or
I've heard the same rumors, and that's all I can say. That's so.
where did you hear it from? Because I think I heard it from, I want to say Larry Johnson, but I don't remember where I picked that
Yeah,
up.
I think I saw that on Slaviangrad, the Telegram channel. That's more than that's a report that appeared more than once. It's really hard to say. I didn't see it in a, let's say, kind of more of an official news source like RT or Reuters or anything like that. But
Hmm.
yeah, it is a rumor that's circulating out there, and I haven't seen any confirmation of it.
Could you center your camera just a little bit so your head's in the middle, just so when I do
Okay, sure.
clip videos that your head's not cut in half? Okay, yeah,
Is
it's a
that
little
better?
better. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes me think,
Yeah,
just
but
the,
I guess the reason one reason why I tend to lean against significant NATO involvement. I think it's hard to believe that they didn't know something about it and weren't involved in some level, but in the end, it just doesn't make sense, and that's what you're actually hearing from different analysts. I think those analyses aren't just sort of, again, deliberate smoke screens or whatever. It doesn't make sense. It hurts. You're pulling people off the line again for what? This will not in any way help the Ukrainians in the long run. Of course, there was that theory that maybe they could strike all the way in and seize the Kursk nuclear power plant and then use that as sort of take it hostage and use it as some sort of bargaining chip. Um, and maybe, because again, these same NATO leaders were convinced that in last summer that the Ukrainians could drive all the way to the Sea of Azov. They could break through, all of the Serovokan lines, right? Of course, none of that happened. They didn't get close, but maybe these people didn't learn anything. I maybe I'm giving the NATO analysts too much credit. I'm assuming that, I know the Ukrainians are rational, especially Zelensky. Again, the story you hear is that this was Zelensky's plan, and it's kind of hard for me to believe that NATO was really behind it full force. They might have just, just ex- they might have simply said, okay, let him do what he's going to do, but it's not something that they were going to push for.
yeah, but I mean, maybe this could just be Monday night quarterbacking because
Yeah,
the Kursk invasion didn't go the way that they planned. I mean, just think about it from NATO's point of view. Ever since the fall of Avdiivka, it's been a constant acceleration on the line. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. What can
right,
Ukraine do? They got to be pulling their hair out. They're like, oh my God, we're losing up to 2,000 men a day now. Double than the amount that we
right,
can recruit,
right.
and we're losing territory at an increasing rate every single day. And it's just coming to the point that they collapse. It leads to desperation and Hail Mary shots. Like what other option do they have? The NATO analysts, they got to be in their war rooms every day thinking like, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Well, they can't
Yeah,
do anything on the front, right? So
right.
maybe this is a last ditch effort. They like, okay, we have to
Yeah,
sue for peace, but we can't sue right now. Let's see if we can capture some territory. We get lucky. We get the nuclear power plant. We can trade that for even more for Zaporozhye, for example, the Zaporozhye plant. I could
yeah,
see that. I mean, of course, if you take a look at it and say like, look, well, yeah, you invade Russia, they're not going to be okay with that. They're definitely going to take that territory back.
right.
But you don't have any other option. It's the best option on the table that some people may come to that conclusion. I think if you're
Yeah,
NATO,
well, it's
and
like you say, it's the definition of a Hail Mary pass, right? It's a very bad move under normal circumstances, but when you have no other option, you just do it. You just throw it up there and say a Hail
right,
Mary,
right. I
right?
mean, the only other option is to negotiate. Negotiate how much territory
Right.
they're going to give
Well, of
up and
course,
call an
yeah,
end to this war.
right.
That's the
Yeah.
only other
Yeah,
option,
but
right? What can they do?
exactly, right. Of course. Yeah, that's rational. That's the
And
rational option, of course, or retreating to highly defensible lines. Just admitting, okay, just retreating now to the Dnieper or something like that, um, and doing whatever you can to defend. Yeah, because rivers are hard to cross, especially in this era of drones. Very difficult operation for the Russians, and maybe that way you can save Odessa. But yeah, they're not thinking that way. They still haven't come to terms really with what's happening. They're just starting to realize that, well, they're realizing that things aren't going their way, and they're not actually going to achieve the victories that they thought they were going to achieve. They're never going to be in Crimea. I think probably all of them know that, at least at some level. And nor will they get the Donbass back, but they're still imagining um, that they can maybe stop things where they are.
Zaporozhye.
Yeah, again, maybe get Zaporozhye or something, right? Um, yeah, well, I don't know. We're talking about people that aren't entirely rational, so that kind of it makes analysis somewhat difficult, doesn't it? Right? You look at it. Well, what's sensible and uh, what isn't? But clearly Zelensky's not thinking in that way. He's
Yeah.
focused on
Well,
PR as always, and maybe a lot of these NATO people are too.
well,
So yeah, anything's possible. I guess
if
the
you've
only one
ruled
I
out,
really okay, it's hard to rule anything out when it comes to NATO and to Zelensky. Everything's possible. I admit it. Okay, maybe I'm trying to assume too much rationality on their part, but I do. I really don't believe that the Russians set a trap. It just does. It seems to me that it really did harm them. And if they set a trap, they set it very poorly. They didn't. The trap really didn't spring until a lot of damage was done. So I don't believe that they were doing that.
yeah, I guess the argument for the trap is that Russian intelligence and surveillance should be more than adequate enough to detect something like this. But I suppose this wasn't a huge force. It wasn't,
Right.
10, 50,000 troops moving in.
Right.
What we had, do we know exactly how many? I heard something like 1,000 or
Yeah, 1,000, maybe at the
2,000.
most 2,000. Right. Exactly, 1,000 to 2,000. And there are two things you could have. Well, first of all, it would not be strange for a certain number of Ukrainian forces to be concentrated to some degree in that area, because a Russian attack has been expected there for a long time. We've been talking about it, right? I think I made the prediction better than a month ago that the Russians are going to launch an offensive, and that it very well may be in Sumy. That would probably be the most likely point. Now, so if the Ukrainians have more than the usual number of forces, if they're concentrating forces there, the Russians could be looking at that and saying, well, yeah, they're preparing to defend, against our coming offensive, or our supposed, coming offensive. Um, so there are reasons why they may just not have taken it seriously. And then, the Russians can make mistakes too. They're not all wise. They're not all their commanders are competent. It could be as again a combination of factors. I don't think that it's all that amazing that they could have been taken by surprise there.
Do you know what type of weaponry, NATO weaponry, was used in this invasion? Were there
Yeah, I think
German
that.
tanks? Can you verify that? Can you?
Well, yeah, I mean I think there was a German politician himself was kind of pounding his chest over there. We're back in Kursk. Of course, it was in Kursk that the greatest tank battle in history was fought, and a tank battle that the Germans lost, and really, really spelled the end. At that point, there was some question about who would the ultimate victor be. But after that, the Battle of Kursk, it was all over. And so,
I
I
believe over 1 million people died in the Battle of Kursk, I believe.
it could
So, I
very
mean,
well
this
be.
has to raise. Yeah, someone can, look it up, verify, but I think it was over 1 million. Like it was
Right,
a horrific battle. When you look at some of these old battles in World War One, World War
right,
Two, the casualty numbers are off the charts.
right.
It's horrific. So I imagine this type of the invasion with actual German tanks. It's so fun, German tanks, but also with American, tanks and Bradley's weaponry as well.
Right.
This
I think
has to raise a
American
huge,
IFVs, right?
right. I think this has to raise that specter of World War II for the Russians. like we said, 1 million people died in Kursk in World War II. This huge battle with German tanks, the biggest tank battle in history. He was in this area, and now German tanks are back in this area. And so
Yeah.
this I think for just the Russian psyche, I think
Yeah.
is a very personal attack.
Right.
And I think this is Putin, I believe, said that this is, recruitment numbers have gotten a huge boost since this
Right.
invasion. People
Which,
are, I
right.
think, are remembering this. So I think it's a terrible miscalculation, I think, for NATO and Ukraine if NATO was involved in this. Um, but but it also just brings to home how serious this is, that we are inching closer and closer, especially if NATO did organize this operation, did train this operation and give it the green light. Then at what point do we say, is NATO at war with Russia?
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
and if we have
Yeah.
a verification on if they were actual non-Ukrainian troops, we're talking about Americans on Russian soil, committing acts of terrorism. Like you said, there's not really military assets there. They gunned down a pregnant woman, in her car. They're shooting into residential buildings, killing elderly ladies. Like this is not a moral invasion. You
Hmm.
need to strike military targets. It's indefensible when armies do this. They descend into terrorism, and at some point you have to designate it a terrorist state, which I believe Putin did.
Right.
So a couple questions there. Well, one is, how close are we coming to a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia, or can we even say that we kind of are? And
Right.
then the other one is, Putin has declared Ukraine a terrorist state after this, the
Hmm.
Kiev regime.
Yeah.
What does that mean for
Right. Well, it means, yeah,
diplomacy in the future?
right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he pretty much, slammed the door on negotiations, at least for the time being, when he said that. And that's what he said. I mean, in addition to declaring them a terrorist state, said that, negotiations are off the table. We don't negotiate with these kind of people who attack nuclear power plants. That again was a terrorist attack too. I mean, and then, that deliberately attack civilians. So for the time being, anyway, there's no question of negotiations. I mean, I think there really wasn't a serious chance of negotiations because the two sides were so far apart. Again, Putin, made it clear, what his terms were. What was it, approximately 6 weeks ago? Um, it's got to be Russia is going to take Crimea and then the four oblasts, right? Zaporozhye, Kherson, uh, Lugansk, and Donetsk. That's not something that the West or Kiev has shown any signs of accepting at this point, right? So they're not even close. But he at least said, okay, yeah, we can negotiate, but just know that we're insisting on this. These are our prerequisites, right? And neutrality, of course, for Ukraine, which has always been there. I mean, these new territories are something that were added on, and that were not something that the Russians were demanding, early on, prior to the conflict, or during the first months of the conflict. But now they are, and then he just made that crystal clear. And he says, well, now, we're just not talking at all, because we regard this regime as a terrorist regime. I think what he's saying is that Zelensky has got to go, that a new team has to come in there. And yeah, well, I mean, not only clearly has he been responsible for acts of terrorism directed against the Russians, but Zelensky and his people um, have broken previous agreements. So the Russians have a very real reason not to trust him. They have to have some people that they can actually trust on the other side, right, before they can really negotiate. Okay, of course, the Minsk Accords, were the Ukrainians and the West never had any intention of fulfilling those. But then the same thing with of course, the Istanbul Agreement. We've gone into that before, but it's just they have this history and then this behavior, and he says, okay, it's just enough is enough. We're just not negotiating with these people. We're just going to go ahead and take these territories that we have to take. at a minimum, and we'll see what happens. He may continue after that.
Okay, and what do you have to say about the idea that NATO is effectively now at war with Russia? I mean, at what point is
Yeah,
that
well,
happening? You know, like
yeah, well, they've been
where does it
inching
go from
towards it,
here?
right? I mean, they've been inching towards it from the very beginning. If you remember, at the very beginning, there was a great reluctance to supply any kind of offensive weapons to Ukraine, right? It's just, I think at the very beginning, Biden himself said, "Oh, we can't give them tanks or whatever. You want World War III?" The Germans didn't want to give them anything, and then they've just sort of slowly been breaking these taboos, these very reasonable taboos on not uh, um, supplying offensive weapons. And then, of course, they went beyond it. We learned that they're applying weapons that they themselves, their own personnel, need to operate. So missiles are flying into to well, initially, you could say not pre 1991 Russian territory, but it was flying into Russian occupied territory. And Crimea, I think everybody kind of even at the beginning of the war, that's always going to be Russia. But they were firing missiles, at Crimea, the Germans, the French, the Americans, and then we went beyond that, of course, and that's when we said, okay, now um, we can fire anything up, or we were going to allow Kiev to fire anything up to a HIMARS anyway, into pre-1991 Russian territory, namely like Belgorod, north of the Kharkov region, as um, in support of defensive operations of the Ukrainian army, in Kharkov. So, for example, we can we can let the Ukrainians fire, let's say, a HIMARS at a troop concentration, because they have reason to believe that these soldiers are massing in preparation for an attack on Ukrainian territory, right there in Kharkov, right? Or this is a logistical base. They're supporting the Russian troops in Volchansk. So they had gone. They had crossed this red line, and they were allowing their own weapons to be used on pre-9, something that never happened during all the Cold War, right? But they they made very they limited it. Okay, they said this area for these particular purposes. And now with this most recent offensive, they've obviously broken it again. They've expanded, the scope of these kind of operations. So it's something that we've seen from the very beginning, right? It's just this inching towards increasing participation on the part of NATO and on the part of the Western powers in the war against Russia. You can't say that it's like an all-out, no holds barred, war between Russia and NATO. But the NATO involvement is obvious. It's more than just this, but it's just all as we said earlier, the equipment that's supplied, the intelligence, the planning, the training, the ISR from the satellites and from and surveillance drones and all that. Their participation is obvious. It's significant and it's growing. And it's at some point, who knows? I mean, it just keeps on. You say like every 6 months you hear, no, 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 we got to stop here, and then they move beyond that. They kind of establish their own red line, and then they move beyond it, and then they move beyond it, and it takes us closer and closer to a direct confrontation, or conflict between NATO and, or let's say, a
Do you
full
think that's a
scale
real
open.
possibility?
It certainly is. I mean, it certainly is. We're just getting, with these kind of, the more that these kind of operations occur, then it becomes, the logic is on the Russian side, well, why can't we strike these bases like in Poland or Romania that are supplying Ukraine? They're doing that. Like these. Yeah, I don't know that they've used ATACMS missiles, but at some point they probably will, to strike a military base in Belgorod or in Kursk. And that will have been, the coordinates will have been supplied by the U.S. and probably the operators of the missile system, are most likely NATO members. And at that point, you say, well, okay, so why can't we why can't we strike, let's say, some sort of support base within Romania or Poland or something? It really becomes, let's say, fuzzy. You can make arguments either way, but it's just, you're creating this. There used to be very sharp lines, and the lines are getting blurred, and the chance for, greater involvement and expansion of the scope of the combat is always there. It's always is expanding, is what I should say. And eventually it could just come into open conflict. Right now there's sort of a veil between the two sides, and there's a certain amount of plausible deniability. There's the support is more indirect, or it's direct but it's limited. But at some point, as these, the involvement grows on the native side, eventually it's just, there ceases to be any kind of pretense, really, that this is anything but a NATO war, and then the Russians are going to respond accordingly. We're not there yet, but we're inching in that direction.
Okay, so let's just say theoretically Russia strikes some type of command post or military installation in Poland, for example, because those are supplying and directly attacking Russian territories. Article 5, you think, would get invoked? Do you think that there would actually be the ability for NATO to amass troops and to actually declare war with Russia?
Oh,
Do you think that could happen?
if it does come to that, and that's one reason why Russia would be very reluctant to do something like that. But the
But
more
I
that
mean,
NATO, but more that NATO increases its involvement, at some point where they say, well, to heck with it, and especially if NATO starts sending troops into Ukraine, at that point it just becomes, it really is a NATO versus Russia war. We're edging towards that, and then um, it's just, all these various rules and limits that they've been violated again and again. What's to keep Russia or from disregarding, disregarding, let's say, that final rule and attacking a NATO member country directly. Again, we're not there. I don't think we're close to there, but if things continue the way they are, in a year we might be there. Let's put it that way, or it could even happen sooner. Who knows?
okay, well, let's pray that never happens. So earlier you were saying that Russia's made it clear basically that Zelensky's got to go, that we can't negotiate with this person, that
Right.
this regime is a terrorist regime. So negotiations are off the table. But what is the likelihood of there actually being a reasonable leader in Ukraine during the stage? I mean, like, if NATO or the US, I should really say, is just going to install who they want to install in Western Ukraine, right? Like Ukraine's not going to be able to, they're not going to have a fair election or actual
Yeah.
referendums and is there going to be much of a difference, even if let's
I
say
don't
they
think
get
so,
rid
to
of?
be honest. Yeah, I don't think so. Um, I don't think this conflict is going to end, with a negotiated settlement. I really don't think so. It's just going to be, accepting the terms of surrender, or simply, the Russians are going to drive to where they need to be, and they'll stop and then just freeze it there. But it's going to be a decision that they make unilaterally, and Kiev will just have to accept it.
Well, the U.S. is going to have to accept it. This is what's
Yeah,
scary, and to
right.
this march to Kiev to basically accept total surrender for Ukraine, and then what Russia would put in essentially its own government that declares
Yeah,
neutrality, and that
I, I don't know if that's what's going to come to, or if they're simply going to take the territory that they want to take. You know, essentially, the Russian-speaking territories.
right. Well, that's
So in
what I
addition
imagine
to
they
the
will do.
right,
But
right,
then they will basically say, okay, you guys will elect your own government that does not require U.S. influence. There will be some Russian influence, I'm sure, and that this new government, obviously the West will cry out now. It's a Russian puppet regime instead of it being a U.S. NATO regime. But as long as it declares neutrality and we can achieve peace, but the road to that,
Yeah.
there's
I
going to be,
don't,
if we are
yeah,
escalating as
right.
we are right now, like I just,
Yeah.
I don't see it ending in without further escalation from NATO.
Yeah. Well, I
If
think there
this is
will
what we're
be. I
at, if
mean,
we don't, we can't
we've
have
had
diplomacy.
constant, right. We've had constant escalation. I mean, that's the thing. It's just every couple months there's more escalation, right? Now and it just may either escalates up to the point where we do have an all-out war between NATO and Russia, and that really could happen, right? Or it escalates
But
up to a
can it?
point
Because there's
where,
no.
right, up to a point where finally Russia calls our bluff and we just, you know, pack up our toys and go home.
Can you make you center yourself a little bit? I feel like you always drift to the right a
Oh,
little
really?
bit.
Okay.
Okay.
Eh,
Um, but is there? I feel like there's no appetite for an all-out war. Maybe the
yeah,
elites want it.
right,
The elites
right.
have this Russophobia. How we can't? I don't think we can have an all-out war, right? Like if NATO says we're invoking Article 5, we get these paltry armies that will go in, and then what? They're going to try to do forced conscription in Europe,
Yeah, yeah.
in the United
No, it's not going to
States.
work.
I don't see
Right.
that
So,
happening.
right. Yeah. Actually, I don't either. I think like outside of the Baltic states and Poland, you just don't have, any hot-blooded young men that really want to go out and fight the Russians. Um, and I think last time we talked about, even when you look at the governments, in spite of all their heated rhetoric, uh, when you look at their military budgets, they don't seem to. You see no indication of any real serious preparation for war. It's just like uh, I don't think they're serious. I don't think at some point, they're trying to pretend they just want to be able to somehow, with their through rhetoric and smoke and mirrors somehow achieve a victory. I think they do have, some of the more sensible and braver generals, the less political animals among them, telling them, "Hey, this isn't going to work." But they're not listening. They just like to assume that they somehow were NATO, so all we do have we got to make some more threats and find some more guns in a warehouse and send it there, and then we'll win. But at some point, it's just going to be clear. Hey, we don't have anything left. The Russians are marching rapidly to the Dnieper. It's either we go all in, declare war and send, tens of thousands of, well, it would have to be more than tens of thousands. It would have to be hundreds of thousands of NATO troops. And I think at that point, they just say, oh, are you kidding? We can't do that. Nobody, I'll lose the election, right? It's just going to be terribly unpopular, right? Um,
Right.
so I don't think, like I've said before, actually um, I'm more optimistic about the Ukraine conflict than I am about the conflict in Palestine. And it's just because I don't see the the willingness to go all the way. I think they're still living in this delusion that they can win without going all the way, and they can't. And when it becomes clear that they have to actually invoke Article 5 and fight a war directly with Russia, I believe, and I hope I'm right, that that at that point they realize, oh, we just can't do this, and they'll throw in the towel.
Yeah.
But it's scary, because who knows? We're talking about nuclear armed powers. That's the scary thing about it. And there are crazy people clearly within NATO and within the Western regimes that really do want war, and they might get it. I think it will be a disastrous war for them, but they might get it. I just think just the absence of any real base for this war. There just isn't a European population that's champing at the bit that wants to fight or will see a need to fight, on behalf of Ukraine. I don't think it's there. It's just it's all rhetoric, and hopefully it'll remain that way.
Yeah, it is scary. I think one thing that I've kind of learned since I've been paying attention to this Ukraine conflict is that don't expect resolutions quickly. And you've taught me that before, that, even a losing army can go on for a long time and still, throw some punches and cause damage. Because Ukraine's been on the ropes. It's clear they're on the losing side, but this thing could drag on. And the longer it drags on, it just means constant escalation. It means more and more desperate attempts by Zelensky and NATO. I mean, attacking the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant is a perfect example of that, as is the invasion into Kursk. And both of these are escalations, right? We are now attacking nuclear plants. We're now using NATO weaponry to invade Russia. And if it continues, like you said, for another year, which I think is very likely that this conflict can drag on for a whole year, who knows where we're going to be at a year from now? I mean, if you look
Right.
back a year ago, would you think that Ukraine would be invading a region like Kursk, or would be, well, they've been shelling the Zaporozhye plant for a while now, so I don't know if I can use that,
Yeah.
but they
Right.
started
Nothing new
again.
there. Right.
Um, right,
Well, a year
but
ago, no,
it's just
if you gave me a glimpse of the future from a year ago, a glimpse of the present, which would have been the future then, I don't think I would have been that surprised. I think at that point, I understood what kind of conflict this was, that it was going to be a long, hard slog. And I'd have to say that overall, like the news for the Russians has been good this past year. It's nothing spectacular, but the trends are all upward for the Russians and they're all downward for the Ukrainians. And just the fact that there was a counterattack like this does not surprise me. Again, it's just that something. Remember, that's what happened. You know, uh, the Battle of the Bulge, just a few months
right.
before the final end of World War II. That was a major counterattack, right? They seized many hundreds of square miles, and
Mhm.
it was quite a surprise. And I imagine there was a time when a lot of people back home in the U.S. were really afraid. They thought, they thought they had it in the bag, and then all of a sudden it looked like maybe they didn't. That the Germans were now, the pushing back, and who knows, could be victorious in Western Europe. But it proved to be,
Right.
what it was, and that was just a last gasp attempt that accelerated the demise of the Nazi regime.
Right. Yeah, I remember I played that battle 100 times in Call of Duty as a kid. I remember that very well in
Right.
the Call of Duty version, of course.
Okay. Well,
Okay, well maybe we can pivot over to the Middle East. So yeah, we have a scary situation in Ukraine and Russia. This thing is a huge conflict, but like you said, the more dangerous conflict, the one that's more likely to nuclear that we both agreed on multiple, talked about this multiple times is Israel and the conflict with Gaza and now Iran. I've just been it's been 2 weeks now since Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran. And I have anxiety every morning. I wake up and look at the news and see has it
mhm.
happened. I imagine the anxiety in Israel has to be just fever pitch. Maybe are you able to talk about what's happening in Israeli society now? Are we seeing an increased exodus? Are we seeing like capital outflows in terms of how their economy is doing? I saw Fitch downgraded their credit rating. What is the current situation in Israel? And do you have any idea? Have a pulse on Israeli society right now?
Um, yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say, but yeah, clearly the Israeli economy has taken a huge beating, and that downgrading of the Fitch rating is just the most recent indicator of that, right? Um, it's more than, let's say, just a temporary downturn. Obviously there's been a huge blow to tourism, and tourism is an important industry in Israel. But that's something that can, let's say, if the war ends one day and then tourism can quickly return to the levels where it was beforehand. But I think more worrying for them is just um, the loss of investment. I think a lot of companies that were planning to invest heavily in Israel are now have chosen not to, and those decisions may turn out to be permanent. And say that Israel is not the kind of society that we thought it was. We assumed that it was just sort of an outpost of Europe, really, in the Middle East. I think that's the way a lot of people looked at it, and and just as secure as France. Now, first of all, that illusion of security was shattered by October 7th, right? And everything that's followed. And then second, it's just the behavior of Israel too has forced a lot of people, except for those who are deliberately blind And there are those people, some of them very important, like Elon Musk. But a lot of people are looking at Israel and realizing it's not the kind of society they thought it was. I mean, that there are crazies run amok. There are mobs that are pounding on prison doors to let rapists out of prison. They say this is shocking to anybody who really looks at it with open eyes. You say, is this really where we want to invest this $1 billion, or is this really does our company really have a future there? And those are the kind of questions that are people asking themselves, and I think are answering in the negative, and that's going to have a permanent detrimental effect on the Israeli economy.
And to compound that, I believe the issue I think also is that a lot of the people that have fled are more secular Jews, probably a lot more of the high net worth Jews, Israelis, because the professors or people that run these tech enterprises. I imagine a lot of them are more secular, and they don't have the same vision of these extremist settlers, for example. So as these people leave, these people that are against the genocide, do not agree with the Israeli state, or are aware of the dangers that Israel is currently in, continue to leave, it's going to create this problem of sort of an increased condensation of extremism. More and more of the people remaining are the ones that are saying we have to, see this through to the end. We got to make sure that, this genocide is completed, that we create the vision of greater Israel. And those few remaining voices, I imagine they're going to be pushed out. Like if I was a secular Jew living in Israel and seeing what's happening, I'd be like, okay, maybe it is time to go get out of here. Maybe I'm going to go back to Brooklyn or Poland or wherever. And the people that are left now you have much more radicalized. Let's say that the conflict ends. What is left of Israeli society now? It is the extremist society that is clearly in control now, because you've pushed out sort of the leftist, more secular, reasonable voices. Do you think that's true?
Yeah,
Is that
well, I think that's so. I'm sure that's somewhat true. I haven't actually seen any polling data on the kind of people that are leaving, but I imagine that they tend to be professionals and people that have two passports and tend to be more cosmopolitan, et cetera, right? Um, but as Max Blumenthal, I think, very rightly points out again and again, this kind of easy differentiation between the secular Jews and the religious Jews is not very meaningful. Because when you actually look at like support for the genocide, you find that it's very solid on both sides. And there are some kinds of, Orthodox Jews that are actually opposed or anti-Zionist, and then it's not such a black and white picture. It really isn't. Israeli society in general, all the political parties are behind the Gaza campaign. They're behind the genocide. I mean, that's the sorry truth. There isn't a group of secular uh, liberal Jews that of any significant number that oppose it. There, of course, there are individuals, like you said before, but it is something that you just find all across throughout Israeli society. I wouldn't be surprised. I fully expect that what you said about those that left, that they're probably people that are less committed to the Zionist project. I mean, if you're fully committed to the Zionist project, whether you're secular or not, and let's remember, the Zionist project and the Nakba, that was carried out entirely by secular Jews, right? Almost, yeah, entirely by secular Jews. But you had very committed Zionists who are secular, and you still have them. And I think that's probably what it comes down to. There are a lot of committed Zionists, both religious and secular, that say it's my duty to stay here and fight it out to the end. And I got to believe we just have to win. We will, if we have to kill them all, we'll do it. Yeah. But those that left are probably the ones, again, that are less committed to the Zionist project, and would probably be the more reasonable voices on the average, I would assume. Again, I'd like to see polling data on it, but that would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Okay, well, let's go talk about Iran a little bit. It's been 2 weeks now, over 2 weeks since the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. So what's taking so long? Is it that Iran is still preparing for this offense, or is there potentially some type of backdoor diplomacy going on, and we can maybe potentially even avoid this whole conflict? What are your
Right.
thoughts?
I haven't heard rumors of any kind of backdoor diplomacy. I remember like prior to the April retaliation by Iran, there already were rumors that it was going on, and then later confirmed afterwards. But I haven't heard. What you hear again and again is the Iranians are saying again and telling different people that have come to try to persuade them, to hold back, to not to strike a blow in retaliation. They said we got to do it, and I haven't heard any signal from any kind of reliable source, any information. I haven't seen any information from any reliable source to indicate otherwise. I think that the Iranians are going to retaliate. Um, they've made that clear. If they don't, then they really do have a serious loss of credibility. I don't. I think they will. I think they understand that. I know they understand that. Um, but it is a very prickly problem, right? They don't want to have an all-out war, but they need to retaliate in some significant way. So there must be debate about what to do exactly. I don't know what the answer to that is, and maybe part of it is that there's an ongoing debate, and they're weighing the pros and cons of different forms of retaliation. That's probably part of it. Then also it's in, they have to take into account the interests of different states in the region. It's just recently that they've achieved a kind of a modus vivendi with Saudi Arabia and the other Sunni states, and that's very important for them. They don't want to upend that. So they don't want to do something that will harm their relations with other Arab nations, and so they do have to actually take into account like what the effects of their retaliation would be, not just on Israel, but on other states in the region. And then there is the military technical side of it. We mentioned like apparently the Russians have delivered a lot of air defense, electronic warfare equipment to Iran, and I assume that even if the Russians are going to be operating, it's going to take a little while to set all that up in a way that's really going to help them. They want to make sure because they know that whatever they do, it's almost near certainty that Israel will strike back, and they want to be able to defend themselves against that. So they don't want to be hasty. And then I've heard it pointed out that maybe actually delaying it doesn't really hurt them; it hurts Israel more because Israel, like you're saying, they're on tenterhooks over there, and like various airlines have already shut down flights until this is over, and so the longer it goes on, the more their economy suffers, the more they suffer psychologically, and the more likely that they'll be surprised. If there are a lot of false alarms, like you say, because I've heard probably at least 4 or 5 times over the last 2 weeks that they're likely to strike within the next 24 hours. Now, one of these times it's going to be true, but when that happens 4 or 5 times, then your guard gets let down. The first time you're up all night, whatever your position is, watching the screen or whatever, and then as it's a case of kind of never cry wolf, right? So when it
Right.
So maybe that's
Yeah.
partly what's going on.
Yeah,
They
that's
could see
true.
that
So
it
the
doesn't
the
hurt them it hurts Israel more to drag this out for a certain length of time. Obviously they can't drag it out too long because then it
right.
ceases to be a meaningful retaliation. But if they strike in, the relatively near future, it'll be obvious that it was a retaliation for this, and yeah, it'll be a well-prepared retaliation, and Israel will only have suffered by waiting for it for an extra couple of weeks.
Right. Yeah, no, it does make sense to keep on waiting because, like you said, the psychological strain, the economic strain that's being placed on Israel are severe, and also the more time that they have, I think it gives more time for just for Iran to set up defenses. It doesn't really give an advantage to Israel to prepare. Like, there's not a
Right.
whole lot that I think Israel can do, and they're just waiting, and this just gives more and more. I just heard recently that I think it was this morning or yesterday that the Russia just said sent the largest or the largest cargo plane in the world is a Russian military cargo plane, and that just landed in Tehran last night. So it's clear that there's still a lot more going on. And so, yeah, I think that that makes sense. It's just the longer they wait, the better for Iran, the worse for Israel. I also think that. Do you think there's a possibility that Israel, during this time they're waiting, that they might try to strike first, which will further condemn them in
Uh-huh.
international opinion and
Right.
in view? Like, look, they clearly can't
They're,
wait because
they're
there's a lot of
completely out of
voices
control.
in
Right.
Israel. Right,
Right.
there are a lot of voices in Israel. It's like, why are we sitting around waiting for them to attack us? Why are we sitting around? Let's attack them now.
Right.
And do you think that's a possibility that Israel could even strike first
Oh, sure.
and before this
Well,
retaliation?
right. Right. Of course, that's what they did during the '67 war. Right. There was a period of tension,
Hmm.
and the tension grew and grew, and then Israel struck first. Um, so yeah, they could. There's no question about it, and I bet Iran knows that. And but the longer it drags out, the better prepared they will be for either a first strike, a preemptive strike by Israel, or a retaliatory strike. So either way, it seems to favor
Right.
Iran if they wait it out. And then they say, well, okay, Israel may do this, but again, it's only going to harm them more in the court of world opinion. So
Mm,
we'll give them a chance to do it, before we retaliate.
right. And in terms of you're talking about their Iran's being in a prickly situation and they have to really calibrate their response. But something you also mentioned is that no matter what Iran does, Israel is going to attack Iran. I mean, they've made that clear, right? I mean, so I think even if we saw a very calculated, calibrated, telegraph type of attack, just like what they did on the
Yeah, I don't
last
think
time, where
it,
they only
I
struck
don't think it
military
will be
targets.
telegraphed, but yeah, I
Right,
don't
right.
think
But
it'll
I'm
be
just saying,
telegraphed. Yeah,
even if
right,
it was, I
right,
agree, it's not going to be.
yeah,
But even if it
yeah,
was,
right,
Israel's going to, turn on all the media machines to tell the U.S. to tell Fox News to blur it 24/7 how they're under attack by Iran and that they have to respond with disproportionate force. They've made that
yeah,
very clear. So I think it doesn't. If they do a small attack on, if Iran executes a small attack on Israel in retaliation, then I think Israel will go ballistic. It will do launch a serious attack on Iran and on southern Lebanon. I mean, they're doing that already, but it'll be disproportionate by much further extreme. I don't think there'll be that much of a difference than if they do a larger attack, right? So I think the calculation is going to be that Iran probably realizes that it has to try to hit Israel pretty hard, not hit civilian structures, but
hmm
to hit as many of their military
could
offensive
be,
capabilities, defensive capabilities, as hard
right,
as they can quickly to disable them because they know even if they just strike one outpost, one base, take it out,
yeah,
Israel's going
right,
to unleash whatever it can.
right,
It'll be the same if they try to take them all out. So if I was Iran, if I'm making the calculation and they understand Israel very well, how Israel operates, they have to say, okay, if we're doing this, we got to do it right. And that's probably also why it requires more and more planning. Get all of your
right,
ducks in a row, try to do this. So if I'm a betting man, I'm expecting quite a large response from Israel and I mean from Iran. And this response from Iran, I think is going to be targeted. It will be targeting military targets only. It's very clear that's what Hezbollah and Iran do. They're not interested in targeting civilian targets. They realize how that would hurt them. On the global stage, the PR nightmare, and plus, they're just not the
yeah. They're
morality of
not,
it. I think they
yeah, they're
understand
not,
as well,
right. They're
which
not
Israel does not.
yeah,
You know,
they're not homicidal
so
maniacs, right?
yeah, that's what I think. They're not right,
Yeah,
right. They're not.
yeah.
So,
Well,
but
right.
they
I don't know.
know
You might,
that
yeah.
what
Yeah,
they
you may be
do,
right. I
they will
understand
strike
the
military
logic,
targets,
right?
civilians. Right, right. Yeah, but I mean, it's just, I just people need to just look at it that way. Like let's take a look at the civilian deaths are what we need to minimize. These people are not party to the war. These are people like me and you trying to live their lives. They have families. They have jobs. They are not fighting, and look how many civilians have been killed in Lebanon, in Syria, in of course in Gaza, in the West Bank, and then look about the number of civilians that these so-called terrorists have killed. It's just the if we had a chart, you would barely see what
Mm,
the axis of evil, all these terrorists, Iran, Yemen, the Houthis, Hezbollah, the Hamas, what they have done is it's minuscule in terms of death. And even when
mhm,
Hezbollah, I think they've killed 7 civilians, and they have. And they owned up to it. They apologized and they offered to pay for the funerals and apologized profusely for this type of thing. And we'll see when Iran does this attack. And I know they're going to be quite as careful as they can be in terms of targeting military infrastructure. We're going to see Israel just level population centers. We'll see civilian deaths skyrocket, and that's horrific. And I just don't understand how anybody can continue to support a country that does this, that is so open to just killing women and children, innocent civilians. And there's just this problem of collective punishment, and that people just get blindsided in the
mhm.
West. They just can easily demonize and dehumanize just a whole
Yeah,
group of people and say that
yeah,
it's okay to just kill them. That's got to end. It's strange. We'll hear, Stalin made that great quote. The death of one is a tragedy. The death of thousands or millions is a statistic. And I think that's the problem. We hear these human interest stories of people that have been
mhm.
killed, and it's heart wrenching. But once you kill 10,000, 20,000, 30,000,
Mhm.
I don't know. Some
You
people can
get
just justify it.
yeah, right, right.
Yeah, they
Uh,
rationalize it.
Yeah.
But that it's just the horror. You got upset when you heard about that one person that was killed in the news,
Mhm.
and it was a horrific thing. But then when 100,000 get killed, you don't bat an eye.
Right.
It's crazy. That's the
Yeah.
reality we live in, though. Okay, Dad. Well, we just passed an hour, so I
Yeah.
think we can end
Right.
it here.
I think we need to end it. You're right. Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, have a good rest of your day. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.